Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2016-2017 FAFSA filing webinar. My name is Daniel O'Leary, Senior Counselor in the Office of Student Financial Services at Hofstra University. On behalf of the Offices of Undergraduate Admission and Student Financial Services, thank you for taking the time out of your evening to join us. Before we begin, I would like to mention that a recording of this presentation will be emailed out to everyone. If you need to sign off early, or miss something at any point during the webinar, the full recording will be sent to the email that you registered with. There will be time at the end of the presentation to review any questions that you may have. Time permitting, we will do our best to get through every question and as many as possible. If we are unable to get to your question this evening, be sure to check our Facebook page within the next week, and we will update some questions and answers to our webpage directly. To help protect your privacy, please try and keep your questions as general as possible. If you have a specific question regarding your situation, please send us a message with your contact information, and one of our counselors will follow up with you next week. Whether you are a student, parent, family member, or friend, we understand how daunting the task of applying for financial aid can be. Although we won't be able to go through every line of the FAFSA tonight, we hope that the information provided throughout the presentation will help answer some of your questions and concerns so you can file the FAFSA at home a little more easily. Tonight's presentation will include an overview to the different financial aid programs, how and when to apply, tips, suggestions, and frequently asked questions on filing the FAFSA, additional resources that are available to you, and we'll have time for question and answers at the end. If you have a question along the way, please post it to the chat and we will go through them at the end. Now, let's begin. What is financial aid? Financial aid is a very general term to describe all the different sources of funding that help fund a student's college education. Grants and scholarships are gift aid and sources of funding that do not need to be repaid. Loans are ways to finance a student's education upfront and pay back over time with interest. Federal WorkStudy is an opportunity for students to work on campus and earn a paycheck, which is a great way for students to pay for other expenses they have along the way. Scholarships could be institutional scholarships or from outside sources. Most colleges and universities do not have a separate application for students to be considered for merit-based scholarships. Typically, by applying to the university directly, the student is considered for an institutional-based scholarship. There are many outside organizations and companies that have scholarships available and typically require a separate application. Scholarships in general are more merit-based, based on the student's academic achievement. Grants could come from a variety of different resources. There could be institutional grants, the federal Pell Grant, the Federal Supplemental Opportunity Grant, also known as SEOG. For New York State residents attending a New York State school, there is a state grant program available as well. Here are some links to various outside scholarship websites. We hear from families every year that there might be an essay that you need to complete in order to be considered for the scholarship website. In the financial aid office here at Hofstra, we strongly encourage that every student and family browse through these websites. There are major companies such as Coca-Cola, Kohl's, Capital One, other banks, and outside companies that post their scholarships directly to these web pages. In order to be considered, you might need to complete a small essay or other statement. But you never know what you can get, and the only way you'll know is by applying for the scholarship. There are various education loans that a student may consider. The Federal Education Loan Program, commonly known as the Stafford Loan Program, is the loan that is available by filing the FAFSA. For freshmen, the annual limit is $5,500. This year, the interest rate is 4.29%, and there's also a small loan fee involved. Another federal loan is the Federal Parent Plus loan. This loan is borrowed and repaid by the parent. The annual limit is determined by the student's cost of attendance minus any other forms of financial aid received. The interest rate for this current year is 6.84%, and there is a 4.272 loan fee deducted from the amount that's disbursed. The rates for the 2016-2017 federal loan programs will be available on or around July 1st. Other student loan options are private or alternative loans. These loans are borrowed by banks or lenders servicing education loans, so the interest rates and terms and conditions might vary depending on the lender itself. Another loan option that we commonly hear from our families is a home equity loan. This might not be an option for every family, but we have heard that you might be able to get the most competitive interest rate on my home equity loan. If this is an option that you think might be available for you, I would encourage you to check with your banking institution directly. Federal WorkStudy is an opportunity for students to work a job on campus. Students earn wages, as the funds are not applied to a student's billing account. A student's federal work-study job is based on their schedule. They're typically part-time jobs. They might be referred to as undergraduate assistantships, and students earn more than just a degree. Working on campus could provide valuable networking opportunities. Students might work in a job in an office on campus and might be connected with not only colleagues from within the university, but from outside the university as well. Now we're going to go on to the filing of the free application for federal student aid. The FAFSA timeline for the 2016-2017 financial aid year began on January 1st. So for those seniors in high school, you are now able to apply for the FAFSA. The federal website for filing the FAFSA is FAFSA.gov. At the end of the FAFSA, if you are a New York State resident planning on attending a New York State college, there will be a link for the New York State tab. If you are from out of state, I would recommend that you check with your local organization to see if there are any state grants available. The CSS profile through the College Board is not used by Hofstra. Some 300 colleges and universities around the country use this profile to determine institutional grants and scholarships. So here's a FAFSA tip. Why should I file the FAFSA? Well, the first reason is that the FAFSA is free. Colleges and universities use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for federal grants, loans, and work study. Some states, including New York, also require it as the first part of the state application for state grants. Colleges and private organizations may also require it for consideration of institutional scholarships and grants, as well as outside companies. If you apply for a scholarship that requires the FAFSA, you may receive a form that must be filled out by the college itself to verify that the student filed the FAFSA. FAFSA tip number 2. What is the difference between FAFSA.gov and FAFSA.com? FAFSA.gov is the official Federal Department of Education website for filing the FAFSA. Up until recently, there was a website called FAFSA.com. There are some private companies out there that say they will file your FAFSA and charge a fee. The FAFSA.gov website, you can file your FAFSA for free. So please be careful if you see any websites that say they will file your FAFSA and be able to get you the most information and financial aid as possible. Please be wary of these companies and these websites. FAFSA.gov is the only official Department of Education website. Who is eligible to file a FAFSA? U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens, such as permanent residents, are eligible to file the FAFSA. Unfortunately, at this time, students who are commonly referred to as dreamers or deferred action students are not eligible to file the FAFSA at this time, and they are not eligible for federal financial aid. There are some states around the country, including New York, that dreamers, those students who fall under this category, might be able to receive in-state tuition rates at public universities. But dreamers at this time are not eligible for federal financial aid. So now into filing the FAFSA. Step 1 is to apply for a Federal Student Aid ID, known as the FSA ID. For those families who may have filed FAFSAs, either it's a parent filing it themselves, a family or friend filing it themselves, or if you have older children or siblings who have filed the FAFSA previously, the FSA ID is new as of May 2015, and this has replaced the federal PIN number. So if you have a federal PIN number but do not have an FSA ID yet, please log on to studentaid.gov/FSA ID and apply for your username and password. This is the new way to log in to all federal websites and complete federal paperwork. The FSA ID is required for both the student and one parent if the student is dependent. Each student filing the FAFSA must have their own separate FSA ID number. So if there are more than one child in college, if a student has siblings going to college, each sibling must have their own FSA ID and their own separate FAFSA. The parent, however, whether the parent has gone to college or if there are other siblings in the household, the parent can use his or her FSA ID for each child filing the FAFSA. We've also come across that there is a helpful link on the confirmation page of the FAFSA. So when the student and parent file the FAFSA electronically and sign the FAFSA electronically with the FSA ID, there will be a link only on the confirmation page that says, do you have other children in college? And you might be able to populate some of that information into the siblings FAFSA a little more quickly. Again, that is only available on the confirmation page. If you exit the FAFSA, you will need to go into the student's FAFSA separately to complete the application. You can use the FSA ID every year to file the FAFSA, so keep it in a safe place. Consider this similar to your Social Security number. Be sure to keep this safe as your own personal information is attached to this ID. For assistance, you can contact 1-800-4FED-AID. That is the Department of Education helpline for filing the FAFSA. Step 2, collect the documents needed for both the student and the parent. All sources of 2015 taxed and untaxed income, such as income tax returns, W-2 forms, benefit statements, etc., will be needed to file the FAFSA. Asset information, such as your most recent bank statements, investments, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, any of those statements will be needed. Be sure to have your Social Security numbers handy and your driver's license if applicable. If you're an alien, a permanent resident, be sure to have your alien registration number available as well. Step 3, if you go to studentaid.gov, you can print a FAFSA on the web worksheet. The FAFSA on the web worksheet is a helpful tool that you can use to help organize your information, and it might cut down on the time you need to actually file the FAFSA. The FAFSA on the web worksheet is a couple pages shorter than the actual FAFSA, so you can fill in this information ahead of time, and while you're filing the FAFSA electronically, you can have this worksheet to reference. Please do not mail the worksheet to the FAFSA or to colleges. This information cannot be processed, the information that's on the web worksheet. The paper FAFSA is still available to file. I would only recommend downloading this paper FAFSA off of the FAFSA website as a reference. You can still file a paper FAFSA, but just note that it could take several weeks, in some instances 7 to 11 weeks. for FAFSA to process a paper FAFSA and send it to the college university. So filing it online is definitely the most efficient way to file the FAFSA. If you have any questions along the way, there are Department of Education representatives available. 1-800-4FED-AID. You'll hear this number several more times throughout this presentation. 1-800-4FED-AID is the Department of Education hotline for filing the FAFSA and all things related to the FAFSA. Federal tax dollars are being paid for these representatives. So if you have any step-by-step questions, please contact this number directly. Step 4, go to FAFSA.gov and click Start a New FAFSA. You'll see on the bottom left is Start a New FAFSA. So if you have not logged into the FAFSA website yet this year, you can click Start a New FAFSA. FAFSA tip. Should I hire a consultant to help me file the FAFSA? We do not recommend paying a fee when you can file the FAFSA directly on the source for free. As I mentioned before, specialized FAFSA representatives are available to assist you step by step, or you can click on the Live Help button to chat with a FAFSA representative online. We have had many families in Hofstra Student Financial Services Office come in, students, parents, come into the office and say that something was done incorrectly. Unfortunately, consultants who may have been hired could potentially mix up information. We've had sibling information get reversed, last names listed as first names, parent and student socials backed up. By filing the FAFSA, you know your personal information better than anyone, so we don't recommend filing the FAFSA with a consultant when it's free to do on your own, and there are resources available to you. What are some common mistakes students and families make when completing the FAFSA? Not asking for help. Please, if you have any questions at all, contact this number. Filing the correct FAFSA for the correct aid year is another common mistake. This current year is the 2015-2016 FAFSA. So if your student attended last fall and is attending this spring, then the 2015-2016 FAFSA is correct. If you're a senior in high school and will be attending college next fall, the 2016-2017 is the correct FAFSA to file. The traditional academic year is fall and spring. So think of it as the fall 2016 term, and the spring 2017 term is the traditional year. So that's how you file the FAFSA with the correct year. Be sure to use correct social security numbers and date of births. Parents, if you're assisting your students with completing the FAFSA, please keep in mind that it's the student's FAFSA, so be sure to enter the social security numbers and date of births correctly. This information does get verified through Social Security Administration, so be sure that all this information is accurate. Do not list parent income information under the student's income section. Please separate the income properly. Make sure that both student and parent signatures go through. When you get to the end of the FAFSA and it's time to submit it, just keep in mind saving your FAFSA will allow you to leave and come back in and pick up where you left off. Submitting your FAFSA will allow it to go through and get processed. But in order to do that properly, both the student and the parent signatures with the FSA ID must be submitted together. If your address has changed, please be sure to update your admission application. If you applied to Hofstra or any other schools back in the fall and you're filing your FAFSA now in January, if your address has changed in between, please make sure that the Office of Admission is notified of the new address. If the FAFSA address does not match the address on the FAFSA, we're going to have a difficulty processing your FAFSA and matching it to the student. So please make sure that all the biographical information matches. What is selective service? Registration is required for young men, and it helps preserve America's ability to provide manpower in the event of an emergency for the armed forces. Almost all men ages 18 through 25 must register for selective service. You can do this directly online at sss.gov, or some some guidance offices in your high school may have paper copies, but the quickest way to do it is going on to sss.gov once your male student turns 18. So please make sure that when the student turns 18, that you're filing for Selective Service. Otherwise, the college or university will need to verify this registration after the fact. Okay, so now going into the principles of need analysis. What exactly does the FAFSA do? So according to the Department of Education, paying for college is a partnership. It is an equitable and consistent formula, and it's based on a student's dependency status. So if a student is dependent, the parent contribution and the student contribution is calculated to form this number called an EFC, expected family contribution. So to put that in terms that might be a little more understandable, the FAFSA calculates all of the information that is inputted into it and sends that to the different colleges and universities you list on the FAFSA. When it calculates all of the information, a number called the EFC is determined, and it's an index number that colleges and universities use to compare against their cost and compare against the other aid that a student is receiving to see what forms of federal aid that a student is eligible for. The Department of Education sees the EFC as a snapshot of the current financial condition, and it does allow for consideration of loss of incomes, special circumstances such as unemployment, disability, excessive medical expenses paid out of pocket. The Department of Education does allow colleges and universities to take these situations into account because they're not directly available to input on the FAFSA. So if any of these situations are applicable to you, please get in touch with your college or university. Please get in touch with Hofstra's office to figure out what we can do to take into account for any special circumstances that you may have. Dependent students must file the FAFSA with the parent with whom they've lived with the most over the last 12 months. That's regardless of who claimed the student on their taxes. Also, if the parent is remarried, the step-parent's information must be reported on the FAFSA. Who is considered a parent on the FAFSA? A parent, in terms of filing the FAFSA, is a legal parent, includes a biological or adoptive parent, or a person that the state has determined to be your parent. For example, when a state allows another person's name to be listed as a parent on the birth certificates, that is considered a parent. Grandparents, foster parents, legal guardians, older brothers or sisters, widowed step-parents, aunts and uncles are not considered parents unless they have legally adopted you. And this chart will indicate the parent's marital status and how it pertains to filing the FAFSA. The next two slides review the independent status requirements for filing the FAFSA. So on this part of the FAFSA, there's going to be several questions that the student must answer. If all of these questions are answered no, that means the student is automatically dependent for federal aid and must report parent information on the FAFSA. If you answer yes to any of these questions, then the student is automatically independent. Just note that some of these questions that you answer yes to may require additional documentation to be submitted to the college or university. So for example, was the student born before January 1st, 1993? If the student's turning 24 during the aid year, they're automatically independent. It asks whether or not the student is married, not the parent, the student. Also, if the student is currently serving or is on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, are they a veteran? And another most popular question that we might cause a student to be independent is, does someone other than your parent or step-parent have legal guardianship of you as determined by a court in the state of your legal residence? This question can be confusing sometimes. The language has changed this year on the FAFSA. If parents are helping students file the FAFSA, they might read this question as if it's themselves. So please note that if you live with your parent is not the legal guardian unless there's court paperwork to verify it. If there's an aunt, uncle, other person in a student's life that has legal guardianship, then you're going to answer this question no, and the student will be automatically independent for federal aid. So now we're going to review some FAFSA frequently asked questions. I know we're getting some questions coming in already. I hope that these FAQs will answer some of your questions. And when we get through these, there will be time at the end to review as many questions as we can as possible. So the first frequently asked question is, my parents are separated or divorced and living apart. Whose information do I put on the FAFSA? You should report the information for the parent who you lived with the most, more than 50% of the time over the last 12 months. And again, that is regardless of who claims the student on his or her tax return. If you do not live with one parent more than the other, please report the parent who provides the most financial support to the student. So if there is equal custody and the student lives with each parent 50% of the time, then it defaults to who is providing the most financial support to the student. If the parents are separated and divorced, but they're still living in the same household, this is new over the last few years. The information for both parents must be reported. So again, if parents are separated, divorced, but are still living in the same household, both information must be reported on the FAFSA. Do parents have to be legally separated to file the FAFSA as separated? And the answer is no. This is one of those special circumstances that I mentioned earlier. If parents separate after filing the 2016-2017 FAFSA, please contact the college or university, and colleges may ask for proof of separate residences, such as a utility bill, copies of leases, copies of pay stubs. This way the university can verify that there are separate residents for both FAFSAs and possibly remove one of the parents from the FAFSA. My step-parent is not responsible for supporting me, so why do I have to report his or her information on the FAFSA? The purpose of the FAFSA is so there can be a snapshot of the household information. So it is required by federal regulations that if the parent you reside with is remarried, both your biological parent and the step-parent's information must be reported on the FAFSA. It's a federal regulation. So please make sure that you're filing the FAFSA accurately if this situation applies. My parents do not have social security numbers. How do I complete that area on the FAFSA? If your parents do not have social security numbers, please enter all zeros in the spaces asking for their social security numbers. Again, the student must be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen to be eligible for federal aid. But if the parent does not meet that criteria and does not have a social security number, just please make sure that all zeros are entered. If you put a number such as a work permit or any other number, it might not link to the parent's information, and an error will come back to the university, and the FAFSA won't be able to get processed properly. We have not completed our 2015 federal tax income returns yet. How do we file the FAFSA? So now that we're after January 1st, most employers may not provide W-2 statements until the end of the month. The FAFSA, the IRS deadline for filing taxes isn't until April. So we strongly encourage every family to file the FAFSA now using estimated information. As you obtain your income information, you can use that to file the FAFSA, even if you haven't filed your taxes yet. But if you don't have any 2015 information available, you can use your 2014 tax return. If the information is pretty similar from one year to another, when you go back in to update your FAFSA, there shouldn't be much of a change. But just note, if there was a substantial change between 2014 and 2015 income, when you go back in to complete your FAFSA with the correct information, please follow up with the university to see if there were any changes to the financial aid. But yes, please estimate on your FAFSA. If you do not have all the information available to you, you can go back into the FAFSA and make corrections later on. The FAFSA requires us to report the net worth of our investments. So what does that mean? The net worth of your investments means it's the current value of all of your investments that are required to be reported on the FAFSA, minus any debt. Only subtract debt from properties other than your primary residence. So if you own a vacation home or you own a rental property, the net worth of that property must be reported on the FAFSA. If you rent out part of your own household, please only report the value of the part of the home that you rent out. So I know we're starting to get some questions on what type of investments are included on the FAFSA. Real estate, this is rental property. So again, do not include the home you live with unless a portion of it is rented out. In that case, you must report the value of the rented portion. Trust funds, UGMA and UPMA accounts, money market funds, mutual funds, certificate of deposit, CDs, stocks, stock options, bonds, other securities, qualified educational benefits such as 529 plans. These are required to be reported on the FAFSA. So a common question we get is, how are 529 plans reported on the FAFSA? 529 plans are reported under the owner as an investment, not the beneficiary. So if the parent is the owner of the 529 plan, then the amount of the 529 plan must be reported under the parent. If the parent has more than one 529 plan, even if that means it's for various members of the family, Department of Education regulations do require that you report the value of all 529 plans for siblings and other students in the household under each FAFSA. So please keep that in mind. So besides the home we live in, are there any other investments that we do not include? Please do not include the value of any life insurance, retirement plans, including 401k plans, pension funds, annuities, non-education IRAs, UGMA and UPMA accounts for which you are the custodian but not the owner, cash, savings, checkings. That information is already reported on the FAFSA in a different line. So under investments, please do not include any retirement plans. How do I find out the federal college codes of the schools I want to apply to? There is a search online when you're completing the FAFSA where you can search for schools by state and input the school code directly. If you're not sure, you can check on the college's website, dial the 1-800-4FED-AID number, and just a note, Hofstra's federal school code is 002732. So you can input this number when filing the FAFSA if you've already applied to Hofstra University. I can only send the FAFSA to 10 colleges online. What if I need to send FAFSA to more colleges? You can change the school codes by going back into the FAFSA, or this is the only change that you can make to the FAFSA on the phone. And just keep in mind, only 10 colleges can be listed on the FAFSA. So if there's another school that you're considering applying to, you must remove one of the FAFSAs, one of the school's codes from the FAFSA and input the new school code. I am interested in living on campus, but I'm not sure. Which answer should I indicate on the FAFSA? When you input the college codes on the FAFSA, there'll be an option to click the housing status for each individual college. So if you're interested in living on campus at that particular college or university, you should indicate on campus. If you need to change the status later to with parent or to off campus, you can contact the Office of Student Financial Services and Financial Aid directly to make that change. What is the difference between the with parent and the off-campus housing status? With parent means that the student will be commuting from their parent or other relative's home. Off-campus means that the student will be commuting from his or her own apartment or their own home. Just keep in mind that this does not impact the student's dependency status, whether or not they're living away from home. And if a student is living off property, off campus, if the student is dependent, a copy of the lease agreement will be needed in order for the student to have their off-campus housing expenses taken into consideration. There's no place on the FAFSA to indicate a special circumstance. For example, a loss of income, maybe a loss of employment. How does this get taken into account? At Hofstra, we have a process called a request for reevaluation. And what that does is we can compare 2015 information to maybe what you expect your 2016 information to see if there's a difference in federal aid eligibility. So if there's a special circumstance that is not indicated on the FAFSA, just get in touch with our office early on this spring and we'll provide the proper paperwork to you. What if I have to make corrections to my FAFSA after I file it? We saw this screenshot earlier when we began the filing the FAFSA. On the bottom left, you have Start a New FAFSA. And when you log into the FAFSA for the first time, you'll be asked to create a temporary password. This way, if you need to make corrections or you've saved the FAFSA and now need to go back and submit it, you can click the Login button and you can return to the FAFSA to make corrections if you need to. How do I apply for the Tuition Assistance Program, known as TAP? Again, this grant program is eligible to only New York State residents attending a New York State college. Unfortunately, you cannot take TAP out of state with you. If you're from out of state, please check to see if there is a state grant program that you could take with you to New York and to Hofstra or anywhere else out of state. But if you're a New York State resident, the FAFSA is going to recognize this. And at the end of the FAFSA, there'll be a link to the New York State tab. That website is hesc.newyork.gov. So if you miss the link at the end of the FAFSA, wait about 3 to 5 business days, and then you can log on to the tab website to file it directly with the state. For step-by-step assistance, there's also a state helpline. It is 1-888-NYS-HESC. So now what happens next? After your FAFSA is processed, you will receive a student aid report with estimated eligibility. Again, this is going to be estimated eligibility based on the information that you inputted onto the FAFSA. There are a variety of other factors that go into determining how a student is eligible for federal aid, and it could vary on whether the student's in-state, out-of-state, at a public university, a private university. So each college will send a specific financial aid award package to you directly. On this student aid report, there will be a note of your expected family contribution. If you see this number and you know it's not a realistic number, this does not mean that the EFC is going to be what you'll be paying to go to college. That will be determined by the cost of the college that the student's attending, as well as all of the other aid that's being received. But the EFC number that we've mentioned a few times will be included on the student aid report. Each school listed on the FAFSA will receive the information you submitted, and as long as the student is accepted for admission, the colleges will prepare a financial aid award package for you. The national reply date is May 1st. So you'll have, once you receive your financial aid package, you'll have a few months to compare award packages and make a decision by the May 1st deadline. Verification. Also on the student aid report, the FAFSA processor will notify you if you have been selected for verification. Verification means that the FAFSA processor is requesting that the college and universities you've applied to verify the FAFSA to make sure that all of the information is accurate. You will need to provide 2015 income documentation, known as the tax return transcript. This is not your IRS tax return, your 1040. The tax return transcript is a document that is provided by the IRS at irs.gov/transcripts, and it provides a detailed outline of the information on the 1040. It's just on an IRS letterhead, and we know that the information was processed by the IRS. So if you see the word verification anywhere on your financial aid award packages, on your student aid report, please contact us so we can review what is needed. So this is the undergraduate financial aid process summary for this current year. There will be some changes next year. I'm not going to go in depth tonight about those changes because this is the financial aid process that will be applicable to students attending in fall of 2016. So in the fall semester of the student's senior year, students began to apply for college. If the student turned 18, completing Selective Service registration. If you haven't already done so, please apply for your FSA IDs. And if other colleges require the CSS profile, be sure to check with that college themselves to see when the deadlines are for the CSS profile. Now that we're into January, you're able to file the FAFSA as well as the New York State TAP application. And the process will now switch over to late February, March. So over the next month and a half, FAFSA will be processing the FAFSA. And to use Hofstra as an example, we will begin to download FAFSAs from the FAFSA processor in late February. Our first accepted students day is at the end of February, and we're hoping by the first week of March or so that we will have all financial aid packages available to students who have had their FAFSA on file by the preferred deadline of February 1st to the February 15th. So late February and March is the time when you'll start to receive your financial aid packages from the colleges you've been accepted to. If you need to complete verification or any other requested forms, this spring will be the time to submit this paperwork. And then April and May are the times where you're going to wrap up your decisions and make your enrollment deposit by May 1st. For the FAFSA, you can list up to 10 schools on the FAFSA, but when you deposit to the college you choose to go to, just keep in mind that May 1st is the national reply date for the one school that you'll be attending. Billing at most colleges and universities begins shortly after this May 1st deadline. So as you begin to plan out your process for funding the student's college education, begin to prep in April and May. This way, by the time summer comes, the student can have everything in place based on the deadlines. So here are some helpful links. Hofstra's website for scholarship information, the federal website for all federal aid programs, studentaid.gov. HES.NewYork.gov is the New York State website, and some really good information is available at finaid.org. So now we are going to take just a couple of minutes to prepare our question and answer session. So if you have any questions, you can keep typing them in, and we're going to go through as many as possible. We will have about 10 to 15 minutes to wrap up the question and answer session. Again, if we do not get to your question, I apologize if we run out of time. We will print out a report of all the questions that were asked and the questions that we did not get to. We will either contact you directly if you provide your contact information, or if it's a general question, we will share it on our Facebook group, which will be available on the next slide. So if you have any questions, please get them in now. This way we can get through as many as possible. Okay, so question number 1, do we need to report 529 assets for another child not going to college yet? And the answer is yes. It's our understanding of reporting 529 plans that the value of all 529 plans under the owner must be reported on the FAFSA. Why can't we wait a month and have actual information rather than completing the FAFSA now? February 1st or February 15th is typically the preferred FAFSA filing deadline. and that is because some funds might be limited. The SEOG program, WorkStudy, those are known as campus-based funds. So each college or university participating in those programs obtain a limited amount of money in those programs. So the earlier you file, the better the chance you have of maximizing the aid that is available that could potentially be eliminated. Will FAFSA notify me if I've completed the form incorrectly? Most likely. If there's an error that is preventing the form from being processed, you will receive notification directly from FAFSA that whether it's the missing a signature, an incorrect social security number, anything along those lines. If you do not see an EFC in your student aid report, that means that there is something preventing the FAFSA from being processed. There are times where FAFSA processes the information correctly, and then by the time it gets to the college and university, it cannot process by the college university correctly. We went over such as address changes or names not matching, if you move, or if you're using nicknames. If there's something on the FAFSA that's not matching the information you have at the college, then it could prevent the FAFSA from processing correctly. The EFC, again, to reiterate what the EFC number is, it's an index number. So if you have an EFC, for example, of $10,000 a year, that does not mean you'll be paying $10,000 a year to go to college. That is the number that the college and universities use to compare to the cost of the college, to compare to what other aid is received. Any types of federal need-based aid will be determined by this number. Can you please explain how the parent would create a separate FSA ID and connect it to the student's FAFSA? So what the FSA ID is, when you log on to the FSA ID website, you create the ID that's unique to the parent's biographical information. And then you'll create a student's ID that is unique to the student's biographical information. When you log into the FAFSA, you use the student's FSA ID. And then when you're going to sign the FAFSA electronically, it will ask for both IDs to sign the student's FAFSA. Is mid-February too soon enough, or should I send estimated information and then follow up? If you're filing your taxes sometime in February, again, most colleges and universities have the preferred deadline of February 1st or the 15th. So it is recommended that you file the FAFSA by those dates if you don't have actual information, using estimated information, and then you can always follow up later on. Okay, the question is, for TAP, you said you have to be a New York State resident attending a New York State school. Does the school have to be a SUNY school, or does it have to be just in New York State? So any New York State colleges or universities, public or private, as long as the college is a TAP participating institution, then the student can apply for TAP. Okay, so another question was, my husband lives out of state. There's nowhere on the FAFSA form to indicate different parent addresses. What I would recommend is making sure whatever address that the student is using, to make sure the student's address is correct. So if the student is applying to the university with one address, please make sure that the student is filing the FAFSA with that other address. Whatever addresses you're using, it must match the student's information. Okay, we just got married this past year, so we will be filing jointly. And one of us is self-employed. How do you recommend us go about this in the quickest way? If you are filing taxes married for the first time, if you're filing by the April 15th deadline, again, just use estimated information. As soon as you can gather your information, you can input it under both parents to combine the income. And then once you actually file your taxes, you can always go back in and make corrections. So just estimate as best as possible. If I don't file the FAFSA, am I still able to get merit-based scholarships or loans? Yes. Typically, for merit-based scholarships, the FAFSA is not required. If you're interested in being considered for other types of aid that might require the FAFSA, then the FAFSA will be required. Any type of scholarship or grant that you receive will specify whether or not the FAFSA is required. What is the latest date to follow up with actual information on the FAFSA? I would strongly encourage to follow up with actual information by at the latest early April. This way it can allow a couple of weeks for each college to process the information and send out award packages. This way you can make a decision by the May 1st date. If you had an unemployment for a lapse of time, do you include as income? You would include unemployment, however, is reported on your tax returns, and then follow up with the college. If you're applying to Hofstra and you're accepted to Hofstra, which I believe all of you are, please follow up with our office so we can evaluate the FAFSA a little more closely. Okay, we're getting some questions about specific asset information. If you have any specific asset questions, please contact the Department of Education directly at 1-800-4FED-AID. The types of assets that we went through on these slides is our best understanding. So some of the questions might be a little out of our realm. So please check with the Department of Education directly. Just to reiterate, Hofstra's preferred FAFSA deadline is February 1st. What is the website for New Jersey state TAP? I'm not sure offhand what state grants are available through New Jersey, so I would recommend checking through the New Jersey State Department directly. When I go into the FAFSA as the parent, do I sign on to my daughter's ID? The FAFSA is supposed to be under the student's name. So you're going to log in with the student's biographical information as well as the student's FSA ID number. The parent ID number will only be needed to sign the FAFSA electronically, or if you're planning on doing a federal Parent Plus loan, then the parent ID will be needed then, but please make sure that when logging into the FAFSA, you're only using the student's FSA ID and student's biographical information. Here's a good question. We have saved and can afford to pay for our son's college. Do we still need to apply to FAFSA? We encourage every first-year student to file the FAFSA. By filing the FAFSA, it's not counted against you in any way. Hofstra does consider students for additional grants just by filing the FAFSA. So we encourage students and families to file the FAFSA. This way, you can see if there's anything else that you're eligible for. There might be outside scholarship organizations as well that require the FAFSA. So we do recommend the first year students file the FAFSA, and you can always choose to file it the next year if there isn't any aid that you're going to be using. Okay, we're just going to go through a couple more questions. Okay, if I delete some colleges on the FAFSA to add more colleges, how do colleges that I deleted receive my corrected tax information? The colleges will not receive any corrected tax information. So if you're changing colleges back and forth, please make sure that the latest FAFSA transaction lists the colleges that you want to send the information to directly. Unfortunately, only 10 colleges can be listed on the FAFSA, so the 10 must be on there that you want the information sent to. Do divorced families report both incomes or just one? That depends on where each parent lives. If the parents are living separately and the divorce is already finalized, the students who the parent lives with more than 50% of the time is the parent who is going to be reported on the FAFSA. Both parents' information do not need to be reported. Okay, so that is all the time that we have tonight. Again, thank you all for joining us. We will review the questions that we didn't get to next week, and we'll post them to our FAFSA our Facebook webpage. So hofstra.edu is our website. If you want to find any other information that has been presented here, we will send the presentation out to everyone. So thank you again for joining us tonight. And if you have any questions at all, please follow up with us and enjoy your evening. Thank you.